Hi and welcome at iStill headquarters. My name is Sebastian. Behind me is my colleague Willem, and today we are going to make a gin on the iStill Mini and the extractor. We're live from the Netherlands, so you can either watch it live, as many people are already doing, or you can watch it in the recording. But if you're live, if you're watching with us, if you have any questions, please put your questions into the comment section on Facebook or YouTube. And during the stream, sometimes we'll take a little break to go towards your questions and answer all of them if we can answer them. And of course, I hope we can answer them. So what we're going to do today is give you a lesson in making gin, which is actually part of our complete and certified distilling course. Because of the pandemic, we've decided to put the course online. So instead of people coming over to the Netherlands here and train with us, you can now take the whole course online and follow all the lessons, not just about gin, but also about whiskey, rum, any spirit you want to make, any distilled product. And of course, the whole theory about distilling. We'll talk about yeast, we'll talk about fermentation, we'll talk about wood aging. So you can either do the course on its own, or you can do the package deal where you get the course and an iStill Mini. So you can actually try to make those spirits at home. And at the end, there's an exam and you become a complete and certified distiller. So after the stream, check it out, go to iStill.com and see what the package actually means and how we can help you to become a craft distiller. But first, what we're going to do today is going to make a gin, and we're going to make a flavored gin, because flavored gins at the moment, they're all the rage. You see a lot of pink gins and they have a lot of strawberry or raspberry influences in there. And also Tanqueray just presented their new gin, which is with Seville oranges. It's an orange gin, and we thought, well, that's a good idea. Let's try and make a gin a little bit like that. So we're going to do that not just by distilling it in the Mini, but also by extracting. And extracting is our way of working with very, very strong flavors. Instead of macerating things that can take weeks or even months, we're going to use the extractor and tell you about that. Going to start first with the distilling part, and we're going to make the gin. Well, the first thing we have to do if we're going to make a gin is we have to have a good alcoholic base. The alcohol in a gin, when we usually make a gin, is not the alcohol we make ourselves. We use a GNS or NGS in some parts of the world, which is basically a grain neutral spirit or neutral grain spirit. It's a grain base that has been fermented and distilled at 96% alcohol, which means there's actually no taste left from the grain. It's almost tasteless, and that makes it a very good agent to carry all those flavors of the botanicals we want in the gin. Because gin, it's a botanical drink, juniper flavored. We want a lot of those flavors in there. So the first thing we're going to do is fill the boiler of the Mini with 5 liters. This is our development still, and it uses 5 liters at a maximum. We're going to fill it with 5 liters of a mixture of water and GNS, so it's at 30% ABV. That's 60% proof for the American viewers. So I'm going to take off the lid, and be careful I don't smash all the glasses here. I'm going to fill it with 30% GNS. Careful not to spill it. So that's a mixture of water and GNS that we made up front, and you can go to the website and use the calculators that we have to make sure you have the right ratio of dilution, water to GNS, because GNS usually comes at 96%. Next, we're going to put in the botanicals, and what I like to do is use a bag. We have this very, very easy to use tea bags. They're actually made for tea. They're linen, so they don't give off any flavor, and they let all the flavors through. Makes it very easy to clean up after that. So I don't have to take all of the juniper berries out of the still by itself. I just take the bag out. So we made a basic recipe, and of course for me every good gin starts with juniper, but also coriander and angelica. For me, that's like the holy trinity of gin. Those are the 3 flavors that are for me the basic ingredients of a gin. Some people don't use angelica, they use orris instead, or some other root. of course, that depends on your palate. That depends on your taste. You're the craft distiller, or you're going to be the craft distiller, and you want to make the gin. And juniper berries are notoriously famous for falling on the ground and getting everywhere, so be careful with them. Coriander seeds are the same, and people, when they don't know about gin, often think that coriander seeds will give you that coriander or cilantro flavor that you have with fresh coriander, with the herbs, which it doesn't do. Coriander seeds give you a very nice citrusy flavor, especially in combination with juniper. So in goes the coriander seeds, and then my Angelica. And Angelica, for me, it's like binding agent. Not that it thickens things up, but it harmonizes all of the other flavors that you use in there. So that goes in. And then, of course, we're going for a citrus flavored gin. It's going to be orange. So, of course, I want to distill some lemon peel here as well. Lemon peel and orange peel. And you might wonder, aren't we going to add orange from the extractor later on? Yes, we are, but I like the combination of distilled flavors and extracted flavors. So I'm going to use a little bit of orange peel in here, and then afterwards I'm going to add the extract from the orange peel as well. Orange peel goes in. Then a tiny, tiny amount here of star anise. I really like star anise in gins because it gives a third dimension, and I'll talk about that third dimension more. It means at the end of the sip that you take, you still have that lingering flavor of the gin. Because they look so nice and they smell wonderful, you're always tempted to put in a whole star anise, but they're far too strong. Just a tiny amount goes a long way. Cardamom. We crushed up the seeds a bit, so people often ask, do I use the seeds or do I use the husks? Use both of them. Just grind them up a little bit. You don't have to turn them into a powder. Just break the husk so the scent comes out, and then you're good to go. Then we have some licorice, also for the third dimension, but also licorice gives a little bit of sweetness. Very, very good combination with orange. And we have some cassia, which is this very strong cinnamon-like flavor. Again, going for the third dimension. Also a very warm spice, very good combination, again with the orange. So if you're wondering about the amounts that I just put in, well, if you do the complete course, then we'll give you a formula. We'll teach you how to use different herbs and different spices, different botanicals in ratio to one another. But of course, that's only the way we do it. It's up to you as a craft distiller to decide how much flavors from one botanical you want to have in there. You might have noticed it's not a lot of botanicals that I'm using, and that's because I think I want a gin to be straightforward and not too complex. You could put in 47 different herbs or botanicals. I don't think they're going to add very much flavor to it. I think they're going to counterbalance each other out. That's why I like a few very, very good flavors in my gin. And of course, the possibilities are endless. So, all in the bag. I don't have to seal it. I'm going to put it in the boiler. Make sure it's submerged and it will float there, which is fine. Now I'm going to put on the power. So we have a power manager for the iStill Mini. This is actually the one from the other one, but I'll show you. It's very simple. Put it on, and I'll turn the power to 100 in this case, because I want a quick warm-up. Usually I tend to go for 70% power for warm-up, but then again, then you guys will be here for ages. So we go for a quick warm-up in this case. And then we have to seal it very, very carefully to make sure that none of the vapors escape. So what we do is we screw on all the knobs. And inside of here there's a seal, and it locks it completely. So when the alcohol and the water and the botanicals start to boil and are turning into vapors, the vapors don't escape on the edges, because we don't want a whole room full of vapors. We want to use those vapors to make a great gin. That's almost the last one. And after that, just check them all again to make sure they're very, very secure. Otherwise, it starts to leak. And the problem is, when it starts to leak, that's going to be a hot vapor. You don't want to be touching that plate or those knobs at the moment that it's hot. So that's the first part. This is going to start distilling, and the last thing I have to do, of course, is make sure, and I'm going to ask Willem to help me with that the vapors that we are creating in here are actually cooled down. Yet, but if we pan towards the top, you will see that there's no cooling, and we're going to put the cooling up. So, Willem, could you help me with that?
Of course.
So this is actually the column cooler that goes on top of the column.
Thank you.
There's a seal in between.
Do you have a tri-clamp for me?
Yes, and a tri-clamp to seal it.
Thank you. And maybe you can take a look at the questions in the stream.
Of course.
The first question is about the square boiler design.
All right. Yeah. So we'll talk about the square boiler design in just a few minutes, well, actually seconds, when Willem has secured the cooling. So the cooling goes on top. I'll explain later on how the iStill Mini actually works, what is going on here. But for now, we want to get the process running. So the water's coming in from the bottom. So we start with the lowest point, click it on. This is where our cold water is coming in, and this is the product cooler. This is where the product that we're collecting, the gin concentrate, will be cooled even further down. From there we go up further to the top, and then the water flows in there, and then completely up there, that's where the hot water comes out. So we'll turn on the water. Yes, you have to return for that. Turn on the water, and make sure that any vapors that we're creating here at the moment are going to be cooled down by the cooling water. And while that's happening and we wait for that to happen, the last thing we're going to do is we're going to pair the thermal probes with our tablet to make sure that we can actually see inside what's happening. And the way we do this, well, I'm not going to show you in detail, and that's because, well, there's two reasons for that. First of all, you won't see it that good on the tablet. Secondly, we're still using the old thermal probes here that are actually being replaced by our new system, Still Control, that will be available next month or the month after that. We're in the last stages of getting that ready, which is far easier to use than the software that we have now. The software that we're using now at the moment for the minis is software that's actually designed for classrooms, and it's okay to work with, but what we want is Still Control. Gives you an app for your telephone or your tablet, and it actually tells you this is the right temperature. I'm going to take hard scuds now, I'm going to take head scuds, I'm going to take tail scuds, and that gives you far more control, makes it easier to work with. In a couple of weeks it will be ready for you guys to order. So I'm basically measuring temperatures at 3 places in the boiler. That's what I'm looking for now, those temperatures in the boiler, to make sure I don't overcook the botanicals. Then we can measure the temperature up here. I will tell you later why we do that. And then at the top where we're taking things out. And of course that's the temperature I'm looking for when I'm going to make the cuts for the gin. So that's all done, and if you can see it, I don't know if you can read it, but you can see that in the boiler the temperature is rising. It's 47.7 degrees Celsius at the moment. There's not much happening in the column, which makes sense because there are no vapors yet that are escaping. So I'm going to put that aside. And we had one question about boiler design. Why is it a square boiler? It's a square boiler because basically the iStill Mini is our development still. We want to be able to use this for recipe development like we're doing now, creating a new gin, and everything should be almost the same as in our bigger units like the iStill 500, the 2000. Those have square boilers because with a square boiler we have no vortex when we stir around, which is better. We have a flat surface area, which means we don't influence our vapor speed. If you take the complete course, there's a whole chapter on still design and why we make the boilers square. So, before we take some more questions, I'm going to start up the extractor over here, because when they're both running, we have a lot of time to take questions. So the extractor Basically, it's the same as the iStill Mini, and when you buy an iStill Mini, or if you have an iStill Mini at home, you have both of them. So if you have one boiler, you can take the column off and put the extractor there. For the extractor, what I would like to do first when it's on here is I'll use a little layer of springs. There are little tiny springs in here that you can see through. I'll put them in. Why? To make sure that it doesn't clog up. So if I'm going to put some fruits or herbs or nuts in there, of course they're going to be wet and they're going to expand. If they expand, there's a chance that they clog up the bottom and the extractor won't work as good as I want it to work. Of course you could also use again a bag like I did with the gin over there, or the springs. Works perfectly fine, both methods. So orange peel, because we're going to make an orange flavored gin. Lovely smell of marmalade in here, and I'm going to put that in. Make sure that you don't fill it up above this level, because that's too high. But also, if you're going to fill it up with something very dry, like this is dried peel, it's going to expand again when it's going to be wet. So I don't want to fill it up till the brim, to just make sure that you have a lot of space there so it can actually expand. Let's get them all in.
That's a good opportunity to answer Valmek Sony's question. Peels, are they dried or fresh? Well,
yes.
we mostly use dried botanicals because that has a constant quality and therefore a constant outcome. So if you use fresh botanicals, you might have a fluctuation in your product, and that is not something that people would want to have. Besides that, the dried botanicals are stored easily and no risk or a lesser risk of getting bacteria infections.
Yes. Also, you have to bear in mind when we're talking about dried fruits, basically the water has been taken out, the flavor has not been taken out. So what I just did while Willem was talking about dried fruits or skins, I filled the boiler of the extractor with another mixture of GNS and water, and this mixture now is at 48%. Why 48? Well, every botanical has its own preferable amount of alcohol that it can withstand, or where it works best. And for me, I think orange works best at 48 to 50%. Basically, your rule of thumb here is the denser the texture of your botanical, the higher you go up in alcohol. You can imagine if you have fresh raspberries that are very, very soft and they almost fall apart when you touch them. If I'm going to hit them with 96% alcohol, it's not going to be a success. Then again, if I have something very, very dense like cinnamon or nuts, yes, I can go up to 70, 80%. Again, screwing on the lid to make sure there's no vapors escaping, and I've put on the power, so we're warming up again, and we're warming up at 80% power. I could go for 100% to make it a little bit quicker, but I want a very steady distillation or extraction happening here, so I won't put it all the way up and maybe risk a little bit of overcooking there. And of course, the same thing as with distilling, also with the extractor, we need a cooling system. So the same cooler that is on top of the column is now going on top. The same style, it's not the same one, but the same system is going on top of the extractor. And we need a little bit of extra materials for that, because the extractor at the top is a bit bigger, and that's because we want to make sure that you can fill it. So you put the rubber ring on top, the silicone ring. This is the adapter piece. Put the tri-clamp there. Make sure it's locked. And on top of the adapter piece comes the cooler. Again, we secure it with the tri-clamp. To make sure it doesn't fall off or it leaks. And with this one, we already put the water hoses there. It's the same system, it just clicks on, cold water in at the bottom and hot water out at the top. And the only thing that's left to do is turn on the water to make sure all those vapors are cooled down. So, distilling over here, extracting over there. Of course, this is heating up now, and it's very tempting to touch it to know if it's warm or not. So be careful with that, because you don't want to burn yourself. So this is a good time to take some more questions. Do we have some more questions, Willem?
Yes, we do.
All right.
We have a question about the column packing. The question is, do we use column packing when we are doing a gin run?
Yes, good question. So, the short answer is yes, but it's a good opportunity to explain a little bit more about the working of the iStill Mini and the iStills in general. So what we have here, this is very basic, so our boiler. I think that's the same for every, well, it's square, but for the rest it's the same principle as we have with every distillation. We warm up in the boiler, then the column is on top of it, and the column is filled with these little springs, and that's because the iStill Mini is a hybrid still. With a normal pot still that is usually used for making whiskey or making gin, there's nothing in here, and it goes into another, like a bow to cool it down. It's called the swan neck or line arm to cool it down. What we have in here is these little springs. The whole column is filled with springs, and that makes it possible to use it as a pot still or as a plated still. With a plated still, you get different plates in your column, and each plate, well, create reflux. Reflux is where the vapors, botanicals, and it's a botanical distilling, so we're taking out alcohol and flavors, essential oils. That alcohol and some water molecules and the essential oils are turning from a liquid into a vapor. Vapors rise up through the column, and when they hit something in the column that's still cold, like a plate or like a bunch of springs, they condense. They become a liquid again because it's cold there. They fall down and they are redistilled. That's what we call reflux. When we're making gin, we're not that interested in reflux, because reflux is a way of creating different flavors when we are creating alcohol, not so much when we're doing a gin distillation. That's why we usually use a pot still. So what happens is it will hit those springs, but the springs will slowly warm up as they are doing right now. I can touch them here, I can't touch them even there because it's going very, very quickly. When the springs are warmed up, suddenly it's a 19% open space because you can look through them. When they're heated up, they're no longer a barrier. They don't create any reflux. So when the whole column is warmed up, it acts like a pot still. All the vapors are coming through. All the vapors at the top, when they reach the top, they are being cooled down by the cooler and they turn into a liquid. So now we have a liquid and it's dripping here. Inside looks actually like this. Don't know if you can see this. Yep. So what happens is all the liquids fall onto the plates, and they fall on the plate here, and they will build up a layer. So if we open the valve, which is completely open at the moment, we'll take out all of that liquid. If we would close the valve, all the liquid will go back. Again, we create reflux. We don't want reflux for this because it's a gin, so we just have the needle valve completely opened and we let all of the springs warm up. If they're all warmed up, it is like a pot still, so we don't have to take them out. There's no need to take them out when we're making gin. Just don't create any reflux by opening the valve completely. It's heating up very quickly, and you can see we have our first distillation happening. So that means I'm going to dial back to 45% power because I want a slow distillation, not overcooking any of the flavors, making sure that I get everything out of there. Usually the first 10 milliliters, that's about the amount that I've got now, those are very, very heavy in juniper oils. So this one, well, you don't want to, if you smell this, It's very, very strong, almost fishy-like, and that's because it's too strong in juniper oils. There's too much oil coming out. You can't use that in your gin. So the first 10 to 50 milliliters, we just toss it away. And now we're going to collect the concentrate, the gin that is coming out there. Usually what we would do, and I think Willem just took the note there, is we will write down the temperature from the top when we went from this, the heads cut to the hearts cut. The first part, called the heads, we're not using that, not because there's any wrong alcohol in there like you have with whiskey, but because there's too much juniper oils in there. And now we have a very slow drip, and we're going to take out about 1 to 1.5 liters, or when the temperature rises 92.3 in Celsius, because that's for this recipe my favorite temperature to go from your hearts cut to your tails cut, where we don't use it anymore. So, more questions, Willem?
Yes, Marco van Dijken asked, what is the capacity in liters of the iStill Mini?
It's a 5 liter still.
Yeah, and it has a 6 liters maximum capacity.
Yep.
If you pour more than 6 liters in your iStill Mini, then you will have liquid from the boil in your column. So keep it at 6 liters or below and you'll be fine.
All right. More?
More questions, yes. Jelle Hingst asked, is there something on top of the extractor so the ingredients won't go all through the still?
No, but I think that's a good point to start explaining the extractor and how it actually works. And I'm going to explain it, and Willem will chime in because, well, credit where credit is due. He actually invented the extractor, so he knows even more about it than I do. What we do with the extractor is extracting flavors, and the old-fashioned, the traditional way of extracting flavors is by maceration. And you can all try this at home, or you already tried it. If you want to preserve some fruits during the winter, what do? You take your peaches, you skin them, and you put the peaches in some nice alcohol so they will keep through winter. And in spring you take them out of the jar and you have this wonderful alcohol that's all peach scented and peach flavored. It even has taken on the color of the peach. So you can use that to make a very nice peach liqueur or add it to your gin. The difference is with the extractor we take out far more flavor, because if you take one of those peaches out of the alcohol, you take a bite, it's still very, very flavorsome. There's a lot of flavors left there, which means I didn't take all of the flavors out. Some of the flavors went into the alcohol, but a lot of the flavors stayed in that peach, which is not very economical if I'm not after the peaches, but I'm after the alcohol with the peach taste. So, what does the extractor do? It combines several processes like maceration, where all the scents and the flavors from that peach, or in this case orange, seeps into the alcohol. Also percolating, like you do with your coffee, where you drip water or alcohol through a product to get the flavor out, but also distilling, like we're doing in the iStill Mini now. Because we filled the extractor with the 45% alcohol and we're distilling. We heated it up. Vapors are forming and the vapors rise up through this tube. When they come over here, we put on the cooling system, so those vapors are now turned into a liquid again. They're a higher percentage alcohol. That liquid falls on top of the chamber where we put all of the orange skins. So what will happen is the drip by drip, this chamber with all the orange skins will be filled with alcohol. And that alcohol will actually macerate those skins. Nothing new, you would say, until we reach this point. If we come above this point, the extractor will siphon off. It will empty itself through this tube, and we will see that happening. All of that macerated alcohol that has a slight orange flavor now is siphoned off and put back into the boiler. There it is, because it's a closed system, it's redistilled. We are now distilling oils with all the flavor from the orange peel with the alcohol. So orange flavored alcohol is being distilled, rising up and turned into a liquid again. Again, this starts to macerate. Now I'm not macerating for the second time, I'm not macerating my orange skins in pure alcohol. I'm macerating them with alcohol that's already orange flavored. So I get out more flavor. it siphons off again. Now the alcohol is even more orange flavored, and again I'm macerating in orange flavored alcohol. It's getting stronger with every cycle. Every time it cycles up, it's getting stronger and stronger. At the end, I've taken out all of the flavor. I end up with almost colorless and certainly odorless orange peel, because I've taken all of the flavor out and put it into the boiler. So why don't we, to go back to the question that Jelle asked, why don't we need something to make sure it doesn't go all the way? It's just sitting here and we're slowly dripping alcohol on top. There's no way they're going to go through the whole system. More questions or anything you want to add to that?
Yes, of course.
Yes.
The reason why this is so effective is that we bypass a equilibrium. If you use like something like cinnamon and you put it in a jar and leave it for a week or a month, that means that the liquid that contains cinnamon is trying to dissolve the cinnamon from your botanical. The more components in your liquid, the harder it gets to pull out the remaining components from your botanical. So if you use cleans that the solubility is restored again, that means that you can extract everything out of your botanical. That is also happening with the iStill Mini. If you get new vapors, the vapors are clean of most of the molecules, which creates a new opportunity to get rid of all the molecules in your botanicals. And that is the reason why it is so fast. I think we did an experiment with cinnamon a few months ago, yep, where we extracted, I think, 1 kilo of cinnamon with 5 liters in the boiler. It took about 6 hours, and normally how long would it take to extract cinnamon with the traditional maceration?
2 or 3 months to get the most out.
2 or 3 months, yeah. So it will save you a lot of time.
Yes. More questions?
Yes, plenty.
Plenty, all right.
Let me scroll up. Some people ask about the ratios we use with making the gin. Are we going to spill the beans on that?
No, we're not going to give you the whole recipe because what we're doing here and what we're doing through all the course is trying to turn you into a craft distiller. And you don't learn to be a craft distiller by having step-by-step instructions. Then you need a recipe book. It's going to be your recipe. Of course, when you're doing the full course, you'll get the insight on how botanicals work together and how the ratios between juniper, coriander, and other botanicals actually work. But we don't like to give step-by-step instructions, not for making gin, not for making whiskey. We want you to understand how it's done so you can do it yourself. And of course, if I'm going to give you all of those botanicals, you can recreate the same gin as we're making here at the moment, but it's far more interesting and it's far better to do your own experiments and come up with your own ideas. Hope that answers the questions.
There's another question about the minimal amount of liquid for a batch in the iStill Mini, and yes, I thought it was about 3.5 liters?
Yeah, it's 3.5 liters. Why? If you go below 3.5 liters, what will happen is when you are taking out, we're taking a lot of liquid out now, when it's completely full, we'll take out about 1.5 liters. If it's already only 3.5 liters in here, you risk exposing the heating element. The heating element will become exposed because all the liquid is gone, it will overheat and you will damage your heater. So that's why we go for a minimum of 3.5. I always, when I'm doing a recipe, go for 5 because it makes it easier to do all your ratios.
Another question, Bob Wenting asked, don't the aromas degrade through the high temperature? I think you mean, don't they degrade when using the extractor?
Yeah, it is, yeah.
The answer is yes and no. Some molecules are very unstable and will degrade, like molecules in ginger. But other molecules, like most of the molecules in cinnamon, like cinnamaldehyde and eugenol, are quite stable, and therefore will remain their own flavor. The best way to check if your molecule or if the taste is changing is just try to experiment.
Yep. Also, we can add to that, because this is the setup for the Mini with the extractor. With the iStill 100, it's the same thing, but you can see it's on top of this. So if we are going to make this compartment bigger, it's going to be really unstable. So what happens when you get a bigger one, like a 500 or a 2000 or even a 5000, the extractor is going to be a separate box next to your still that you hook up with the still, which actually means what we're dripping on top is already cooled down alcohol. We're not boiling any of the flavors that are inside there. And you can see it's slowly starting, so we see that we are getting a little bit of liquid in here, and that's actually the first distillate that has been dripping through those orange peels. And it will fill up here, and when it's completely full, it will siphon off. And you can see now, that's always, for me, that's one of my favorite things of working with the extractor. You can see this was the first alcohol that went through, didn't do much, but here we're already getting that orange color from the orange peel coming out. And that's one of the best ways of knowing when your run is done with the extractor. When you have taken all the color out, that's when you actually know that you've taken everything out, because the color particles, they dissolve, but they don't dissolve very quickly, so they're the last to go. If you've taken the color out, then you've taken all the flavor out as well. So you can see here, still completely transparent, and here it's going to be more yellow, and that's the yellow and the orange coming from the orange peel.
Next question, Kevin Fox asked in the YouTube live stream, are you using the new probes? Not yet.
No, not yet. No. They're coming, the new probes are coming. We're just using the old probes here because anybody at home who has an iStill Mini can do the same thing as we can, and also the new probes, we want to make sure they are completely good and working, and tests on them. When the last tests are done, then they will be shipped, and probably for the next video we're doing, we'll be using the new probes, and we'll show you the software that goes with the app that you can use on your iPhone or your tablet.
Another question, I like this one already. William, in your yeast nutrition recipe, use the potassium nitrate in my yeast nutrition protocol for the energy that yeast needs. I wouldn't leave it out because it is a vital substance for the yeast to get as much energy as they really want to have. So for a neutral spirit, just follow the yeast nutrition protocol, and it's as easy as it can get. Yeah. More questions. I think we answered this one about the extractor volume. Arnoud Vloer said springs are really working well. Been there with pineapple, so yeah, they're quite good. Yeah. How did it turn out, the pineapple? Was it nice, or?
I think he wrote at the iStill University Facebook group that it was very, very good.
Oh, okay,
so that's
great.
one of the other nice things you get when you do the course and you pass the exam. You're also becoming a member of a closed Facebook group, the iStill University, where all the people who already took the exam, who studied with us, are gathered, and there's all sorts of questions that you can ask them all, and there's all sort of answers that you get there. So everybody that's experimenting there, like Arno, I know he's been working on with the extractor on creating a pineapple scented rum, pineapple flavored rum, and it worked very good. He tried extracting it, he tried distilling it, and he's able to compare it. And indeed, we talked with him about the springs at the bottom to prevent clogging up. Also, the bags in there work really, really good. More questions?
Yep.
All right. You guys have a lot of questions. It's good.
Brian Arnold asked, with your extractor, does the return pipe to the boiler have a non-return valve at the bottom?
With the extractor? No.
Nope.
You mean over here? No, we don't need a non-return pipe, because you mean if we overboil it or you filled it to the brim, just don't fill it that much or put it back, the power.
Another question in the Facebook. Sebastian mentioned that he, for this recipe, stops the hard collecting at 92.3 degrees Celsius. Is this the temperature in the boiler or upper column? And
column.
Do you collect further into the tails?
Yeah, that's the temperature for this recipe. It's not for every gin, it's for this recipe. And that's the temperature at the upper column that we take, not the temperature in the boiler, because that will reach that point far quicker. And yes, I do tend to take more tails samples after that and write them all down. So what we will do at the end, and I'll show you when we get into the tails, then I will take little samples in little glasses, note down the temperature every time I take another cut. And then when I think I need more of that third dimension, I want more of this flavor into my gin, that means I go to the temperature where I stopped collecting. So it could go up.
Another question. Does he mix the grain neutral spirit with water to get to 48% alcohol?
Yes. Yeah, so the grain neutral spirit comes in at 96. We used a dilution calculator on our website to know how much water we have to add to get to the 30% in this one and 48% in this one.
And another question, Mr. Garcia asked, how many times do you let it cycle? And that's an interesting one,
yeah,
because it is different for all the botanicals. Some botanicals extract quite easily, and you're done quite quickly, and others behave differently, and you need to cycle it more often. The best way to check it is to look at the siphon tube. And if it turns clear, that means that all the ingredients are fully extracted. If it still has color, that means that there are still flavors left, and you have to keep continuing with the extraction. Maximum safe ABV for the boiler when using the extractor. A safe ABV is below 45%, is that right?
Well, there you can go up higher.
Are they allowed to? For a potential hazard?
Well, that's different country and every distillery, because there's different rules there. Usually don't put 96% in the boiler and start distilling. Yes, it's possible. You also risk getting a lot of vapors very, very quickly. Doesn't do much for your extracting. So when you're extracting, I wouldn't go above 60, 65. And you don't need to, because when you're going for a higher percentage, you're already distilling. So the vapors that go up in alcohol are far higher in alcohol than what's in the boiler, because alcohol boils at a lower temperature. The vapors come out first. So you already go up. If I go up to 96 in the boiler, I'm not gaining anything.
Another question from Mr. Garcia, and I don't know what our policy is on this question, but the question is, can you use the extractor for cannabis to get THC?
Yes.
Yes, you can use it, and I might have read some in theory. Expecting cannabis somewhere for CBD oils.
Yeah, so, they are. Yeah. Also, well, that's a fun thing, because the Netherlands is quite known for the cannabis and the cannabis politics. But people come to us, can you do a recipe? Because by Dutch law, we're not allowed to do that. It's different in every country in the world. For instance, in Canada, Netherlands. So, did we experiment with it? No, we didn't.
Some questions in the Facebook live stream. Right. Universal certificate.
Yes, exam. You have to pass the exam. After you've passed the exam, then you get your certificate, and it's an official certificate.
There are two questions about the gin we are making.
Which is going quite well at the moment. So if you see me doing this and tasting, yeah, it's strong and it's very, very good.
They both asked why we didn't pre-soak the juniper berries 24 hours before we distilled this recipe.
That's a good question. We usually do that. It's a good way of getting more of the juniper flavor out, especially when you're working on a larger scale. What we usually do is steep the juniper berries overnight, so all the flavor will come out. We didn't do that now because I wanted to show you guys the whole process.
Another question in the Facebook live group. Is it okay to use powders with the iStill Mini, such as almond powder in the bag? I would advise you to not use powders because they are quite likely to get into the liquid and will extract. That is what we are trying to prevent.
Are you talking about the extractor or distillation now?
I think he's asking about the extractor. If it is with distillation like we're doing with the gin, then powders are fine.
Yeah, powders are fine in here. You're worried about powders because they're very heavy, sticking to your element, for instance, put them in the bag, or even agitate. You get an agitator with the old models as well. You could agitate. You don't really need to because they're fine. With the extractor, it's a different story. When you have powders in the extractor, they tend to clog up the whole lot. So,
is the extractor included when you purchase the iStill Mini? Yes, it is.
Yes.
Yeah. What will the ABV be of the liquid after the extraction run? It would be almost the same.
Yeah, so basically it's a closed system. We're heating up 48% alcohol. That's going up in alcohol percentage when we're heating it up because it's going over. And then we cool it down, it drips on top, but then it goes back into that mixture here. So what will happen if you have something in there that's fresh, maybe your ABV goes down a little bit because there's water coming out of your product in the extractor also going into the boiler. But usually we put in 48%, we end up with 48%.
Can you use more botanicals at the same time in the extractor? Yes, you could, but it would be more difficult to manage your flavor profile. So what I would suggest is do multiple runs with your extractor and then combine the result. That way you can manage what you have in your final product. And it's also quite easy to do calculations with your final product because you know how much you put in the extractor reservoir and you know how much liters you put into your boiler. And that way you get the grams per liter quite accurate, and that will make calculating your final product even easier.
Yeah, it's one of those points where we disagree. Of course you could do it, but I think one of the main advantages of the extractor is that you take so much out. So you really get all of that flavor out. And for every botanical, every fruit that you put in, that amount of time that it needs to extract and the ABV that you're going to use is going to be slightly different. So by combining different ingredients in the extractor, you're not using it to its full potential. There will always be botanicals that are not completely worn out, that they haven't given off all of their flavors when you combine them, because some of them will be empty before the other ones are. So why not just do them one by one? You end up with a lot of extract at the end and just combine them. It's easier, it's more economical.
Any more questions? Oh, about the size of this iStill Mini.
Yep.
I think the boiler is 35 centimeters square.
Yeah, I don't know by heart, but if you want, go to the website on iStill.com and there's a spec sheet there and you can see all the measurements. In the meantime, I'm just tasting the gin because it's going to be quite good.
Aren't we supposed to taste it together?
No, you're supposed to stay over there because of social distancing. Yeah. Yeah, so you see we're taking out, so it's going to be about 1 liter. We're approaching the 90 degrees now at the top of the column. And you can also see that it's already here, which means it will siphon off in just a couple of minutes. And you can see the difference here. I don't know if you can see it at home. Maybe we have a piece of paper that I can hold behind. Yeah, well, you can see it. You can see the difference in color here. Take that flavor of that color out. Any more questions on the moment? At the moment?
A lot, yeah. Keep them coming.
They keep coming.
Is it possible to configure app to cut heads and tails, or is it a manual process? I'm not really sure what you mean by...
on the app? On the app.
On the app, yeah.
Right.
I think what you mean is, can you dial in your own specs? Well, no. Yes. And the app will give you a warning when to switch your beakers or your collection vessels. So in that way, the switching is manual, but you can dial in your own cutting temperatures, cut point temperatures.
Yeah, and maybe that's a good way of going over that process again with the bigger stills, but because that's where the question is coming from, I think. And if you don't know our bigger stills, why are we even talking about this? Well, with the bigger stills, and maybe, I don't know, we can try to pan the camera towards one of the bigger stills, and we can show you how it's done there. On the iStill Mini, we don't have automated cut management because that's far too complicated and expensive to make. Also, it's the other way around. It's a development still. At the moment, we are actually deciding by tasting where we want the cuts to be. If we know where the cuts should be, we put that into the library, into the computer of the bigger still, and it will make the cuts automatically. So I will show you. Is it possible to go over there? Great, all this technique. So with the bigger still, this is the iStill 500. If I have all the information for my recipe from the iStill Mini, I know where I want, for instance, my heads and my tails cut to be, at what temperature, then I'll dial that into the computer over here, and I have a program, so I can say, make this gin, make the orange gin, as I did it on the iStill. And the still will do it by itself, and will make, the stream will come off here, and then it will make the cuts here at the select. So yes, it's done automatically on the bigger stills, and still control will be able to do that with the bigger stills as well in time, but with the iStill Mini, that's your development still, you're doing it the other way around. Actually, that's the way the app is going to give you the information you need to program the bigger stills. Any more questions? Before we go to questions, I'm going to change the beakers again because otherwise they'll overflow. And after, yes, approaching 90 degrees at them, too much. And we'll go to another question.
With fresh berries in the extractor, do you prefer to use a bag?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, you do.
Most definitely. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that's one of the things I can. Oh, we just missed by going to the big still that it's siphoned off here. So we didn't play a trick on you, but it's siphoned off. We'll do that again and again. So problem. So it's siphoned off here. Yes, if you are using fresh berries or even dried berries in the extractor, I would prefer using a bag. Why? Because it's very, very difficult to get them out. They will swell up because of all the moisture that's in there, and it's almost impossible to get them out easily. So with a bag, that's far too easy, far more easy. And the other way of doing that is, if you're not in a rush, just leave it for 2 days until they're dry again. If they're dry again, they'll come out much easier. Next question.
John Korn asked in the YouTube live stream, with the new probes, will there be 3 or just 1? You will receive 1 probe because that's all you need.
And you can order more if you want more probes. Yeah. More questions?
Yes, it's about the power manager of the extractor. You don't need to check the temperature for the extraction process. What is your power setting?
At the moment it's 70.
Yeah.
It's at 70, yeah. So yeah, how do you know what power setting you want to use? Well, again, if I have something that's very fragile like raspberries, I don't want to overcook them or hit them with a lot of hot alcohol or go too quickly, so I'll go for a lower power setting. Also, I went to almost 100 when we started, just to make sure it started the process, and then Willem came in, I don't know if you saw that, and put it back because it was going a little bit too speedy. And if you're not careful, then you're running out of cooling water. Well, you won't run out of cooling water, but then you have a risk of overcooking, and you don't want to do that. So you just dial it back a little bit. It's now at 70, so it's giving a very steady distillation and a steady extraction. And you can already see it's up to here at the moment, which means we've almost filled it again. Of course, the first time will take longer because all the ingredients are dry. Now they're wet, so it's easier for the liquid to stream through.
Do you have a list of distributors of your stills on your website? I'm in Australia.
We don't use distributors. You just go to the website. You can find all the information there, and just fill in the form if you want some more information. Just contact us and we'll be in touch with you from the Netherlands.
Another question is, we have the original Mini. To upgrade to the new Probe and App, do we need to buy 3 or just 1 for the column? Answer is you need 1, but if you want to have more, then just order more of them, but 1 will be sufficient.
Yes?
Let me check for more questions. Head back to the YouTube live stream.
And in the meantime, I almost had one of the cups overflowing. Just went okay. And if I'm tasting this now, we're getting towards the tails flavor. So what do I mean with tails flavors? Well, actually, heads, hearts, and tails make up a 3-dimensional drink. With a 3-dimensional drink, we mean that if you have a little bit of those lighter flavors and a little bit of the heavier flavors in your drink, it will stay in your mouth and linger on your palate longer. So, for instance, take a vodka, that's a very one-dimensional drink. There's only the slight burn of the alcohol, there's not much flavor there. It's not supposed to be there because it's vodka. And with whiskey, especially single malt whiskey, you get a very, very long finish. When we talk about finish, that's part of the 3rd dimension. With the botanicals that we're using, some of them come over at the beginning, some of them come over at the end. And it's the same when you drink it. When you smell and drink a good gin, you will pick up on those light citrusy and floral flavors first. And at the end, you will get those heavier flavors like cinnamon, like pepper, like the aniseed, whatever you're using. Sometimes you want a lot of that, sometimes you want a little of that. If you're going to make a sipping gin that you're drinking on its own, yes, you want that 3rd dimension to be there. If you want a gin that's good for mixing, especially with tonic, tonic will give you the 3rd dimension as well. So you don't need to go too far in there. Making another cut.
Nick Salter asked, what would the flavor profile be if you put the peel directly in the boiler rather than the extractor? If you put the peel in the boiler, then all the components will experience more heat, a higher temperature, and therefore the more bitter components will leap in your spirit. Yep. It will be bitter, and if you use the extractor, it will be more fresh.
All right, we're going to take a look at the extractor again because I think it's going to siphon off any minute. And just for the video, I'll try to speed up that, that process. As you can see, that's already again filled with all this lovely yellow orangey color. So any minute now when it comes up to here, and I can squeeze it a little to see if it goes quicker. Of course, when you want to do that on video, it never works. But then it will siphon off and take all of that out. And you see, we still have a lot of color coming through, which means there's still a lot of flavor there that we're taking out as well. Doesn't want to siphon off yet, so that means probably we're somewhere here and we need enough pressure in the chamber to push it down and create that siphoning. I will keep the camera on here so we can see it. In the meantime, yes, ask us another question.
Another question about water we use for dilution. The question is,
wait, there we go, you see it's happening. Now it's siphoning off everything. It's taking all of the yellow out. I think you can see it better if I have my hand over there. And it's quite a lot that it's taking out. And you will also see now it's getting less color because that's actually the alcohol that's on top of it. Now pulled through all of that orange. Of course, it will take on less color because it has been there for a shorter amount of time. And now you see all the bubbles. It's empty. And the process will start again because it's a closed system.
So the question about the water was, what type of water do you use? If we fill the boiler for distillation, then we use normal water, because the minerals in the water won't distill and come in your product. If we use water to dilute a product, let's say a gin, then we use filtered water. You can use demineralized water, you can use distilled water. Anything that got rid of the minerals is good for diluting a product, or if you use it in your still for extraction, then also use distilled water or demineralized water, because sometimes you want to use the extract in your product instead of distilling it, and that means that you don't want to have your minerals in the boiler present already.
All right, just been tasting the gin, and I think we're at the end of it. We're at 92.1 degrees Celsius at the moment, and I think there's too much flavors coming over now that I don't like to have in my gin, so I'm going to switch it off. That's at 92.1, which means if I'm going to make a recipe out of this gin for the bigger still, I will tell the computer in the still that it's 92.1 degrees Celsius where it should cut for tills.
Question on Facebook, is it necessary for the siphoning process to occur during extraction?
Yes, that's the whole point.
Yeah.
Yeah. If the siphoning needs to happen, if it doesn't happen, we're not extracting, we're just filling it up and macerating.
If the siphoning doesn't occur, which could happen with the older types of the minis, no worries, it will just take a little bit longer.
Another question?
Still looking.
Still looking, all right. So we switched off the iStill Mini here, where we're distilling, and we ended up with quite a lot. Of course, we're not going to use this small one. Remember, that was from the beginning. That was the one where we actually took out the excessive juniper oils at the beginning. So what are we going to do with that? We'll just toss it away. Or we'll give it to Willem if he's not looking.
Another question on the YouTube live stream.
Yes.
How does the iStill Mini differ in process with the 500 liter plus extractor? Does it therefore take longer, and how do you extrapolate timing and extraction between the two?
Well, yeah, basically it's the same process, but if we're talking about the extractor, yes, of course it takes longer, because you have a lot more alcohol and water to warm up, and you have a lot more botanicals or fruits that you're going to extract. So yes, it takes longer, it takes a couple of hours longer probably, and there is no certain way of knowing in the beginning when you're making your recipe how much cycles you should do for your extraction. It depends on your product. It's different for every product. It could even be different for every season. But usually the best way of knowing when your extraction is completely done is when the extract coming through the tubes, and that's why we have transparent tubes, is completely clear. If you've taken all of the color out, then you've taken all of the flavor out. But it also happened, so be careful with that. What I used to usually do is when I'm extracting and I don't see any color left, I let it run for another 2 cycles, because with some products, especially flowers, sometimes it seems all the color has been taken out. You're getting clear liquid out, and suddenly the color comes back. That only happens with flowers, it never happened with fruits before. But the extractor is new technology. We would love to hear from you guys that are experimenting with it. Send us an email, put it on the Facebook group, put it in the comments below this, your experiences with extracting are, so we can build up together a library of all the information about extracting different flavors.
Another question is, do you use the extractor to get flavored alcohol and then mix the liquid to make new flavor profile? Well, let me check. Mr. Camera guy, can we change the camera to the table over there? So what we have here is a library of all sorts of alcohol and all sorts of mixtures.
They don't see it yet, but it's
They don't
coming.
see it yet?
Yeah, now they can see you.
Okay,
yes.
great. So what we do is we collect individual components, we macerate individual botanicals, and when we do recipe development, we try to mix and blend all all the desired flavors. If you leave it as if you leave it like a extract, that means that it still has color, then you're done immediately after extracting. If you want to distill it and turn it into a essence, like the ones on the top, you can then use it to, you can then use the extract, put it in your boiler for gin making, and then distill that off together. So it goes both ways. Either you use it as a liqueur, or you can add it to your boiler for gin making or recipe development.
Very good. So we've stopped the run on the Mini, and we're ready now to go to the next step. I've been tasting all of these different cuts that we made, and it's actually not a cut like Heads Hard Still, but it's more like fractioning, we call it. We fraction this gin, so we have the different flavor profiles on different temperatures. I actually like them all, so I think I made the right decision in cutting it off now. We're going to mix them all together because it's basically what we want to use to make our gin. And what I'm going to do is put them all in, because this is what I want to use. So it could be that I don't want to use that last one, for instance, because I don't like that flavor. There's too much of cinnamon in there, or cassia in this case, or there's too much aniseed, so I decide not to use that one. Then I have to go back to my notes and see when did I make a cut for this one that I'm not going to use, or the one before that, because that's going to be my tails cut. But for now, I'm going to put them all in. Now I'm going to hand over the cup to Willem and ask him to do a measurement on it, because now we need to determine the ABV. It's probably, because it's now a gin concentrate, a distilled gin, going to be 70 and 80% ABV. Will you measure this for me?
Of course.
Give me a question in the meantime.
Yeah, that's what I was trying to suggest.
All right.
Can we buy the extractor without the boiler?
Why would you want to buy the extractor without the boiler?
Because the extractor is great.
Yes, but yeah, you need the boiler, you need the distill to be able to use the extractor. Without distill, you can't drip your alcohol on top of the extractor. So, and also it needs to be a closed manufacturer. Hook up very easily an extractor and make sure that whatever siphons off goes back into your boiler. It doesn't work like that with a copper still. All right, so Willem is measuring, and in the meantime I'll have another look at the extractor that has been siphoning off again, which makes sense because we'll probably have a little bit of a shortcut here. Otherwise, we are just waiting for the extraction to finish completely. Could take, especially with orange peel, around 3 or 4 hours to get everything out. In the meantime, let's talk about a little bit more about gin and flavored gin. And I'm sure there's some questions over there about the different categories of gin that you have. Because what we're creating here at the moment is basically a distilled gin that could also be labeled as add anything to it afterwards. It's not a London dry gin. Of course, we're looking for a flavored gin. We're going to flavor it with extra orange extract that we are making in the extractor over here, which means we can't call it a London dry gin. We're just going to call it a gin or a flavored gin. I don't care in the 19th century when before that gins were usually sweetened because they weren't very good at distilling. The alcohol that they used didn't have a lot of good flavors. Actually, it was quite horrible. That's why they used juniper berries to make it better. That's why they used sugar. Those gins are now known as the Old Tom gins, the sweetened gins. And I can assure you they're actually better than in the 19th century. When column distillation was invented, a new way of distilling, and they were able to make a cleaner alcohol, they could take that sugar out. They didn't have to disguise the foul taste of bad alcohol, took the sugar out. Of course, when you take sugar out, you get a more dry mouthfeel. It's where the term London dry gin comes from. But there are incredible good gins on the market, a large amount of good gins, even well-known gins that are not London dry gins. So don't be hung up on that label.
Are we aiming at 45% or 43%?
We're aiming at 43%. Okay. So what we're now going to do is, Willem has measured the gin concentrate. What was the ABV there, do you know?
71%.
71%. So we went from 30% alcohol that we started out with to 71%. What we did is we put the botanicals in there, and of course all those botanicals have etherical or essential oils, and those oils in the botanicals are what give off their flavor. And you probably know this already, but let me explain again. You see the same thing with cooking. If you're going to do something in a dessert or in baking with lemon, you use the lemon zest, not you use the skin, and you don't use the juice or the meat from the fruit itself, you use the skin. And whenever you are working with lemon zest, you will have noticed that's a little bit oily on your hands. Those essential oils are what gives lemon its flavor. Those essential oils easily dissolve into the alcohol, and when we are distilling and the alcohol starts to turn into a vapor, the essential oils cling on and you concentrate all of that flavor. That's what we're doing with distillation. And it's every time I do this, I think it's a remarkable process, because you saw the amount that we used from the different botanicals. There's about, I think, 1.5 grams of aniseed in there. And you can, in 5 liters, or the 1.5 liters that we've taken out, you can certainly taste that aniseed with just 1.5 grams. So those essential oils are very, very strong. And that's the reason why I like working with the extractor and taking even more out. Because for me, the craft of craft distilling is about creating flavors. So at the moment, we had a concentrate of 71%, and Willem behind me is diluting that with filtered water. So when we're distilling, we're not too, when we're distilling gin, I should say, we're not too worried about the water we're using. When you're making your own alcohol, you're creating a rum, you're creating a whiskey, your water is a whole different story. The water is actually very, very important in the fermentation process. And if you go to the online course, you will have a whole chapter on just fermentation and how water influences the taste molecules when you're fermenting. But when we're just distilling in the mini for a gin, well, that water and all of the elements that are in there, like all the calcium or other particles, they won't evaporate, they will stay in the still, they won't influence the taste. So with that water we made the distillate, and now with filtered water, because this is what we're going to drink actually, Willem has diluted it with filtered water to make sure there's no other flavors from the water itself influencing the gin. So we started out 71% and you brought it back to 43% by just adding filtered water until we're at 43%. And now we have a wonderful gin.
Cheers.
Cheers, yeah. So the first thing you will smell immediately is the juniper berry and the coriander. And of course, when the gin comes off the still, it's fresh, it's strong, it's pungent. It's maybe even a little bit too strong. We always advise when you add your water to the gin concentrate, you leave it. Ideally for 5 weeks. It can take up to 5 weeks to make sure all the molecules find the right place and find their perfect spot to make that perfect gin. Of course, if you make a lot of gin, you do a lot of recipe development, you do a lot of distilling. Yes, we are able to smell this and taste this and know what it's going to be like in 5 weeks. We know what flavors are going to melt together, to blend together. Also which flavors that are, because it just came out of the still, will mellow out over time. I'm going to try it now. Has that third dimension, I can still taste it at the back of my throat. Very, very good. And there's orange in there. There's certainly orange in there. Also lemon, the orange is coming over at the end. At the end also I get a little bit of freshness again, I think from the cardamom, but also the more warmer and heavier notes from the cassia and the aniseed. But of course, this is now only half of the story, because we want to turn it into a flavored gin, and that's why we're still extracting. So the extractor has siphoned off again, and I think it still needs a couple of runs. So if there's any more questions, we'll do that first and then take out the extract. Are there more questions, Willem?
Yes. Good. The question is, will the video be saved on YouTube after this live stream? Answer is yes.
Yes. Any more?
You say the certificate is official, but official from what institution?
It's an official exam that you take with the iStill University, so you get an official iStill University diploma.
Arco van Dijken asked about the ABV coming from the still. The final product is 71%.
Yes, and now diluted back to 43.
How do you use the extraction liquid when, say, making a flavored gin, or perhaps using a seasonal fruit which wouldn't be available all year?
We're going to do that in a couple of minutes when it's siphoned off again, and we'll take it out, and I'll show you how we'll turn this distilled London dry gin into an orange flavored gin using the extract. So we're not finished yet, guys. Bear with us.
Kevin Fox asked, when making an essence from the extract, is the liquid clear? Yes, it will be colorless, unless you have a lot of oils, because the oils could turn it a bit yellowish.
Yeah.
But in most cases, it will be as clear as water. So if you want color, then use an extract. If you want a clear spirit, then distill it into a essence.
Yeah, I think that's a good point to talk a bit about essences, if you don't know what we mean by that. When we have made an extract, we've taken all of the flavor out, we can redistill that extract into an essence, which means instead of taking it out and using it directly, we redistill it now in the column. So we take all of the oils out, the color stays behind, we get an even more concentrated flavor. And anything that's seeped out of the skins or the peels that doesn't really distill doesn't come over. So we had a wonderful example of that. We once did that with jalapeno peppers, really, really strong peppers. So when you take that out of the boiler and you taste it, that's really, really spicy, almost like a Tabasco times 20 or even more. But when you redistill that extract, you get a clear liquid that still has all the flavors of without any of the sharpness.
Dirk Hoffman asked, can you measure the reflux in the still? Yes, you can.
Yeah, of course you can. And measure the reflux in the still like we measure everything by temperature. So if we close down the valve and create reflux, we will see those temperature differences, which will tell us there's reflux going on. And we do that on the thermal probes the easy way or the simple way when we're using the Mini, but it's a very complex system that is on the bigger stills where that is done every second they take the measurements, and also the bigger stills make another calculation there to compensate for differences in air pressure, because with a different air pressure you get different outcomes in temperature. So they do a recalculation for that as well.
Is there a time to let the gin mature or settle after making or mixing it with different extracts?
Yep. Again, it's 5 weeks. So it doesn't mean we've just diluted this one and wait 5 weeks, then add the essence. We add the essence as soon as we have it. So usually we will distill your gin. For instance, if you're using a seasonal product for your gin, and you have extracted that and you have it on stock, you make your gin, add the essence or add the extract, then add the water and wait for 5 weeks.
Another question about the extractor. Can you do a London dry gin by using extracts from the extraction process? And the answer is yes, but it must be distilled all at once in the still, otherwise it isn't a London dry gin.
Yes.
So when you have your extract or extractor, make sure to put everything in a boiler and then do a distillation with the extracts inside it already. Don't add it afterwards, because you may not call it a London dry gin then.
Exactly.
Madhur says, very interesting and educational information. Well, thank you.
That's it for the questions?
No, not at all.
No, not yet. So already, again, siphoning off.
Another question about our cooling water. What is the cooling water temperature? It's 7 degrees Celsius. And the follow-up question is there a certain range you should always stay within?
Yeah, the cooler the better.
yeah. Always make sure that all the vapors are cooled and turned back into a liquid. And if it's possible, then you are at cooling capacity.
Yep. So yes, if you go above a certain amount of temperature or above a certain temperature, your cooling isn't that efficient. We can't tell you how to do that because every distillery is different. So for us in the Netherlands, it's far easier. We have a lot of water, it's cheap, and the water is quite cool. But there's also people who are using iStills all around the world that have cooling systems in place to keep their cooling water cool. System using glycol or using a closed system so they don't waste all the water. That's up to you, depends on your setup, depends on your distillery.
When distilling, would yield on the Mini be scalable on a 500?
Yeah, it's times 100. It's very easy. It's basically times 100 because it's 5 liters up to 500 liters where we're doing recipe development. The amount of botanicals that we're using in the Mini, we just scale it up to the 500 times 100. It's that easy. Temperatures stay the same.
Someone asked, would I also be able to make dragon's water with this? And I am sure you mean vodka. Yes, you can make a very good vodka with this.
Dragon's water, I like that one. Is that a vodka?
Don't ask, yes.
All
yes.
right. I'm not asking. All right, so it's siphoning off again at the moment. You can see that it's almost getting clearer. Ideally, I would say we'd let it run for another hour to be very, very sure. But of course, well, we have some more questions to do, but I don't want to waste your time by just waiting. It's, well, one of the things that I always like to distilling is actually pretty boring. The fun part of distilling is creating the recipes and of course the drinking afterwards and working with flavor. If you found that all out and you're putting your still on, yeah, that's just waiting for the product to come out and to be finished. That's why I like automated stills so much, because that means I can do something else with my time instead of sitting next to the still, making sure everything goes all right. So I'm going to switch it off now, and that's something we do now for the video. Usually I wouldn't do that right now, I would let it do. When you switch it off, wait for it to cool down, because we're going to use the extract from the boiler, and that's going probably at this time going to be around 90 degrees, so very, very hot. It's not something you want to handle. You want to be sure that you cool it down first. Of course, for the video, we'll take a little bit of a risk and we'll take some out in a couple of minutes after some more questions. But first, I'm going to snap codes and why is he in the back, so if anything explodes, which is usually the case when Willem is around, I'll be safe over here.
Do you keep the power manager at the same percentage through the distillation? Yes, because every change in your power manager creates a change. Crank it up to 100 or 80% just to speed things up. But as soon as vapors are reaching the bottom of the column, we put it back at 50% or 60% depending on what we want, and we don't touch it anymore. Because the more variables you have in your process, the more variables you have to take account for in scaling up.
Yep.
And that's quite difficult.
Yep.
Is filtration needed or recommended after extraction?
Yeah, it's not needed. It depends on what you want to do with it. Sometimes you get very, very tiny particles of fruits or other botanicals in the extract. So a simple filtering is enough. Even the filtering that you can use when you're filling your bottles, that's enough.
What ratio do you use for the extractor? Mostly a 5:1, if I'm not mistaken. So 5 liters in the boiler and 1 kilogram in the extractor reservoir. Again,
it depends on the size of the extractor and also on your botanical. You can imagine if I'm going to fill it with lemon verbena, there are very light leaves, I need a lot compared to when I'm going to fill it with hazelnuts.
How many grams of botanicals can you use before it starts to get cloudy? Aiming at a gin, I imagine.
Yeah, if your gin becomes cloudy, in those oils coming over. Why? Well, because oils are flavor. So you have a lot of flavor that is coming over, but those flavors, those oils are so much present that they cloud your gin, it becomes cloudy. It's the same effect you see when you add water to something like a pastis or an ouzo. You don't want that cloudiness because your customer probably doesn't like it, will think there's something wrong with your gin. The only thing that went wrong with your gin is you had a lot of flavor over. So we can't say, well, it's always that amount that is going to give you a lot of cloudiness. Depends on the botanical and depends on the amount of different botanicals that you use. We do have very good solutions for getting rid of that cloudiness, and when you take the online course, you will learn more about essential oils, how to use them, and also the ratios you can use, but also how you can fix that cloudiness without losing the flavor.
Stefan Burney asked, we use vapor-infused distillation in a traditional still. Can that be done on an iStill? Sebastian?
No, it can't, because we don't like it. Very sorry, don't mean to slack off your still or your product. Vapor infusion usually means that you have a basket of botanicals hanging in the vapor path. So it's the vapors that hit the basket and hit the botanicals and take those flavors out. It's a system that is usually recommended for something that's very, very volatile, like rose petals or jasmine flowers or things like that. My problem with vapor infusion is that you don't take a lot of flavor out, actually. And also when people say, yeah, but it prevents the botanicals from boiling, well, it actually doesn't. Don't try to reach into your vapor basket and take the botanicals out when your still is running. It's bloody hot, so you're still boiling those flavors. If you want to do those very volatile flowers, my advice would be use the extractor with a very low amount of alcohol, 10 or even 5%, and a lot of water. You'll get those flavors out beautifully. You can add them to your gin. You get out far more flavor, it's far more economical than using a vapor basket.
Question about the probes. Why only one probe? Why don't we get more probes when buying the iStill Mini?
Basically, the one probe is what you need to make your measurements up here. That is where you decide where your cuts are. So that's why we decided to go for one. You can always order more. You also have to take into account that the new probes, we developed them ourselves. They're far, far better, far more sturdy, less problems with the Bluetooth connections than these ones, but also means they're far more expensive to make.
What about the oils in the gin? Does this affect the gin or make it cloudy? How can we prevent this?
Yeah, we just talked about that. I think that's the same question. When you get oils in the gin, it means you get flavors over. Congratulations, you've done very well. You get a lot of flavor over. You can prevent it either by using less botanicals, or you can use different tricks to make sure that you don't get that cloudiness at the end in. I'm not going to give you all our trade secrets at the moment. Another question.
Dick Hofman asked, or actually said, come on guys, you should buy a Anton Paar Snap 51 to determine the ABV. It takes only a few seconds and gives a very good accurate reading. Well, yes, but we are distilling made easy and not distilling made pissing expensive. But yeah, you are right, it is more accurate, it is quick, and I think it's almost Christmas.
Yeah, it's a good suggestion. That that product from Anton Paar is a good way, a very efficient way of measuring your alcohol. What we want to do with these videos is appeal to everyone who's already distilling or trying to be a craft distiller or just thinking about taking this up. And that means we're not going to advise you to begin with buying a piece of equipment that's several thousands of dollars or thousands of euros, when you can also do it with a simple old-fashioned measurement. But yes, if you can afford it, go for it.
There's a question about the column and a temperature. Could you explain the reflux measurement with the second temperature probe a bit more in detail? Shall I pick that up?
Yeah, I don't think we should go in too much detail. Again, that's something that's handled on the complete course, because again, that's different for different products. It's very important when you're making whiskey, it's very important when you're making rum. It's not that important when you're making gin like we do at the moment.
So, shall I pick it up, or?
Yes, just a little bit.
Little bit. The two temperature probes on top of the still is to check for stability. We have certain fractions in our boiler when making, let's say, when making a vodka. We have the heads, the hearts, and the tails. If you see a fluctuation in your temperature probes, that means that there are multiple fractions present at once. And we don't want that. We want to make perfect fractions because we want to make a perfect separation. So if you see the temperatures jumping and if you see a change in value of both of the probes, that means that the separation process hasn't been stabilized yet. And I'm not sure if I can get into more details.
I think you have given the gist of it. So yeah.
It's good. Yeah, okay, great. Let's check Facebook live stream again.
That's the fun of working on two platforms, YouTube and Facebook. He has to switch all the time.
What is the temperature of the cooling water coming out? It's about 20 degrees Celsius when we use 7 degrees Celsius.
So it comes out at around 20 degrees. Yeah. Which is still too cold.
In a rotation evaporator.
Yep.
Are there, the chat switched, it jumped. Are there some things that are still better achieved on a vacuum, like volatiles? The only thing I can imagine is very fragile flowers, very fragile flowers, and ginger. Anything to add to that, Sebastian?
Yeah, the only thing I encountered that is better doing rotovap is anything to do with dairy. So if you're going to make, want to distill cream or want to have the flavors from anything cheesy or dairy product, yeah, that will burn even in the extractor or it will clog up the extractor. Even my experience with extracting ginger, it's very good. Actually, I think it's better than using in a rotovap because with the vacuum distillation with ginger, I don't get the sharpness of the ginger, and I think that's one of the key components of taste. There's not much difference between rose petals. I've done it in a vacuum distillation. I've done with the or with the extractor. I think it's the same thing. The big difference there, the vacuum distillation is incredibly expensive.
With the 500 iStill to distill gin, would you recommend a fermenter and a mesher, or is there a distillery package?
If you're going to make gin and you want a mesher and a fermenter, it means you're going to make your own alcohol as well. Yes, a mesher and a fermenter, make sure that you don't have a bottleneck in production. You can do meshing and fermenting in the iStill 500 as well. So that's not a problem. In 1 week time you can go from grain to gin if you want to do that, but it also means that you are spending the whole week with a mesher and a fermenter separately. You can speed up that process because you just have more space. If you're not going to make your own alcohol, you don't need the mesher or the fermenter. Package deals, no, we don't do package deals, but of course just go to the website again and you can get into contact, because usually when someone asks for a package deal, it doesn't mean you want to have a certain amount of money you don't want to pay. You want to bargain, but there's another question there. There's a question about how should I design my distillery and how should my distillery work, and we can certainly help you with having the conversation about that.
Another question in the YouTube live stream. Is it possible to run the extractor too long? Well, you can exaggerate it, of course. Don't run it for multiple days.
Nothing will happen.
Nothing will happen. It will only cost energy. Any worrification when diluting? No, not for me.
No?
No. There are people there that are making a huge fuss about it. There are some situations that you could notice it, but if you rest it after diluting, I wouldn't be worried a bit, no.
No worries there. All right. So I think it's not cooled down enough yet actually, but we're just going to try it. We're going to take out some of the extract that we made of the peel. And I think we should do this probably in a glass bottle.
Yep.
Yeah, so you'll get one and we'll take that extract out. So remember,
step aside a bit, please.
I'll step aside because it's going to be hot. Yeah. So you can't see it now, but at the front there's a valve at the bottom, so we can take everything out of the boiler. So you can see all the color coming out. It's still hot. So I have to be careful when I smell it. It smells amazing. Actually, that's a strange thing, because if you remember when we started out and I filled it, I said it smells like marmalade. This just smells like fresh orange juice, actually. And that's what it tastes like as well. It's very, very strong, very fresh, and you get the bitterness of the peel as well. It's actually quite impressed. I thought it should have more runs, but it's already really good. So now we have another question to answer. Are we going to add this to our gin and then measure and dilute again? Or should we dilute this extract so it's the same ABV as the gin that we already diluted? So there's different ways of doing it. It's up to you. There's not one method that's better than the other method. In this case, I think it's the best to actually dilute a little bit of this. And so we have the same ABV, that's now 43% at this one, and we can add it to it. So we don't have to add more water to the gin that we already made. We just add water to the extract a little bit. So I'm going to ask Willem to do that again for me.
To do what?
So we go, and remember, we don't have to measure this. It went in on 48%, and it's still 48%. So it's just a little bit of water, I think, to go from 48 to 43. With 43, it's going to be the same amount of alcohol, the same ABV as the gin that we made. Yes?
Thank you.
Give me another question in the meantime.
Oh, yeah, sure.
And then we can go on with that.
What's that on William's desk behind the juniper? Well, that's me. No, it's the iStill.
Oh, right, yeah. So the iStill Nano, that's... it's cute, isn't it? It's really, really cute. It's actually, we designed this especially for cocktail bars or gin schools, or people. You can make 1 liter of gin or any ingredient you want to distill with this small one. It's fun, isn't it? This is a prototype, actually. So, while Willem is doing this, I'll talk you through the process. It's very, very easy. Again, he's measuring the ABV.
No, I'm not measuring.
What are you doing then?
I'm diluting. We know that 48% went into the boiler.
That's right, yeah. So he doesn't have to measure, yeah. So by adding the water, we now go from 48 to 43.
A little bit of blending. Smells good.
It smells really good, yeah.
There you go.
All right. So, now very simple, we just add the extract to the gin. How much? Well, that's a good question. We don't know. It depends on your taste, your palate, and how much you want to add. So the best way for me to do that is taste it again. And taste this again. And just add a tiny amount. You could use a pipette to do that. Just tiny droplet into the gin. Gives it a really, really nice orangey flavor. A little bit of color, not enough here. So I would usually say I would add from this extract, if it's stronger, even less, but from this extract I would add to the gin around, so do the measurements. So you can see it already has some more color now. And again, it should rest, especially because this is still quite hot. And that will influence a little bit. So this can go away. I can taste the new one now. Of course, when I'm doing this for an official recipe development, we will measure everything. We will measure all the amounts that we put in. We'll do about 20 or 30 of these glasses with just tiny amounts, more, until we know I like this, I don't like this. It's not much fun for you to watch me tasting 20 glasses and you're not having a drink at all. Well, maybe you are having a drink at all at home, but you're not tasting what I am tasting. So I speeded up the process a little bit. There you have it, orange flavored gin. Very, very good. Want to taste it, Willem?
Yeah. Thank you.
So yes, if I want to recreate this recipe, we have taken down all the statistics, all the numbers, the temperatures, the amounts of ABV, the amounts of alcohol we used, the amounts of peel we used. You should write every step down if you want to be able to reproduce the recipe that you made. We just did it in a quick way now to show you guys how the iStill Mini works for distilling, how the iStill Mini works for extracting. Of course, you could do other things with it. For instance, with this one, at 43%, add a little bit of sugar or a little bit of syrup, turn it into a wonderful liqueur. If you want to add some more flavor to it, add some whiskey to turn it into a whiskey liqueur. Add some brandy to turn it into a more French-style liqueur like Grand Marnier or something like that. Redistill it and it becomes an essence, and you can do wonderful things like it if you want to have a clear gin or flavor of vodka with it if you don't want to add any color to your vodka. You have a lot of possibilities by using the extractor. We're going to take the last couple of questions, I think.
Yes, and there's one question about a Geneva. Let me scroll back to the question.
A question about Geneva. Geneva being the Dutch drink that's actually, as we like to say, the grandfather of the gin. Geneva is the drink that started the whole idea of gin. Also the word gin, it's the abbreviation of Geneva. It's a Dutch invention actually, but we don't mind the English claiming it.
There's a question about the Oat Geneva recipe. Do you extract juniper and add to the fermented and distilled oat?
For Old Geneva, no. Old Geneva, and that's something that's very, very confusing for people. You have Old Geneva and Young Geneva. They have to do with the way they are made, with the recipe, not with the aging. The big difference is with Geneva, instead of gin, you actually add some what we call malted wine, which is the basic spirit made from barley, or oats. You have to be able to taste that grain base. So with Old Geneva, you add more of that grain-based malt wine to the neutral grain spirit, and then you can flavor with the juniper. So you don't add that malted wine, or you don't add the juniper berries to the fermentation. You distill with the juniper berries and you mix them together. Some recipes say redistill that malted wine as well. Some say blend the juniper concentrate for the Geneva with the malted wine. Hope that answers the question.
Yep.
Last one?
That's really a moment for me to actually step into the picture a little bit.
They can't probably hear you because you're not our CEO. Yeah, you are now our CEO coming in here. So,
yeah, I just wanna thank you guys for putting up a stellar performance.
Thank you.
Both of you.
Welcome.
It's our first live stream. Glad to see all of you guys participate out there. Let us know what you think about it. Give feedback. Let us know what we should talk about next time, right? We're enjoying what we're doing.
Absolutely.
I'm not really happy with you guys actually drinking the gin without inviting me, but
we call it organoleptic analysis.
Yeah. Right? Thanks, guys.
You're welcome. So, a visit from our own CEO. He's probably back designing a new still now. All right, last questions?
Someone asked, I see a lot of spamming, hi Odin. Someone asked about a live rum distillation.
A live rum distillation, yeah. maybe in the future. Of course, the difference with that is that if we want to do, we can do a distillation live for rum. Of course, if we're going to make rum from scratch, that means almost a week of fermentation, which is very boring to watch. So, but of course, yeah, it's a good idea. We're thinking about doing more live streams for rum, for vodka, for any products you guys would like to see us make over here. Is there a lot of questions left?
There's one question.
Yes.
It was very informative. One last question. How does your liver cope with all the tasting?
Well, as you can see, when we're tasting, it's like this. So our liver, well, let's talk now. Let's not talk about Willem's liver, but my liver is fine because.
I think that should be about it. Yeah,
that's it. If there's any questions tomorrow to see if there's anything more, we can either answer directly there, or in the next live stream that we do, we'll pick up on some of the questions that you guys still had after this. For now, thank you very much for watching. I hope it was informative. I had a lot of fun making this gin for you. Go out there, start experimenting, making your own gin, making your own extracts, and let us know what you guys are making out there, and hope to see you soon. Thank you.